Welcome to this brief introductory video on product pricing. This is one of the first steps in launching your Pro Forma for doing either a business plan or assessing a market opportunity. Essentially what we're going to do is talk about two different perspectives on product pricing. One would be the so-called cost plus, and the other would be market pricing. So let's take a quick look and see what this is all about. Remember, prices are set by the value of the product or service in the market. And so essentially what we have is suppliers, which in principle would be you with your product, and in exchange for this product or service, a customer has a perceived value and of course is willing to pay for that. So the interesting thing about all of this is that we have an industry where there's a lot of information about the different products and services among them. So sometimes prices normalize based on industry competitive actions. But more importantly for the Pro Forma, which is what our focus is going to be, we're going to look at really what the market is saying about prices. And again, there's a couple different ways we can set price, and we're going to take a look at those. Many technical people think of pricing as cost plus. That is to say, there's a certain cost of production to a device, let's just say a mounting base for an electronic unit. Let's just suppose it's 80 cents, basic cost of production. Then what they do is they say, well, I'm going to add a certain percentage on top of that, which seems to be a fair and reasonable margin, and therefore you have a target price. In the case of cost plus, you have the cost, you add a certain margin, and then what you end up with is the dollar being the cost plus. An alternative perspective is to not worry too much about the cost of production initially, but really to say to yourself, well, medical devices are set by either reimbursement limits or by market value. And in this case what we do is almost independent of the cost of production, but again, we appreciate that it ultimately has to be less than the market value, but what will the market bear? And the market will bear based on two different things. What is allowable by the government, so that's a reimbursement limit or the insurance company, and what is allowable by the perceived market value and what people will pay. A lot of manufacturers will produce what we call pricing guides. So what they'll do is in this case, in this electrophysiology product guide, Biosense has provided a document for their particular products, the way you might want to achieve a reimbursement, what the reimbursement limits are, and how you actually code to get those limits. So again, this is more of a what the prevailing allowable reimbursement by insurance or government is, and that will almost by default set the price of the product. Now let's just go back really quickly. What we have to realize is and appreciate is that market value set by reimbursement must be greater than the cost of production in order to be profitable and solvent as a company. If we stop for a minute and think about investments in products and what it takes to bring things to market, we have to think in terms of a typical investment portfolio. Not all of the ideas, not all of the products, not all the services that we imagine are actually profitable. So if we think of each of the products as an individual company or basically a portfolio of companies, we see that looking at lines 9 and 9 to 15, what we have is a series of product or company investments, and they might have had an initial value based on the investment of $1,000, but because of the failure of the product in the market or the failure of the technology or for whatever reason that investment did not make it to market, essentially what you have is a zero final value for that product or company. So again, there may be a lot of sunk costs, there might be a lot of emotional involvement in this, but essentially what happens is if you have a product or service and it does not make it to the market and an investment has been made, its residual value is zero, and therefore the return on investment is totally negative, which I think is pretty clear. So what you hope for in a given portfolio is that out of maybe 10, maybe 70, 80, 90% of your products, let's just suppose that they will lose money. Hopefully, 1 or 2 or 3 will actually be profitable. And the idea is that part of the pricing strategy might just be that in your portfolio, knowing that you will or have lost some money, you got to make it up on the winners. And so that is to say, let's look at this particular company, Y, where the return on investment is 50%. Now, that's certainly not a cost plus if we think in terms of product pricing. So if we think of a product that whose say market price would be $1,000 and we charge $1,500, somebody would say, well, if it was a 10% cost plus, it certainly would be a lot cheaper than $1,500. But again, in the context of knowing other products will lose money, you have to get a high ROI. So the most extreme case, which comes up quite a bit in pharmaceuticals, and we'll talk about that in a second, is where you actually have you have a significant final value to achieve a very, this is better than triple-digit return on investment with an annual rate of return of 72%. This would be considered just extraordinarily high if it was the only product of that company. But when we take all of the products that are invested in and put it in context, then what you see is the aggregate annual rate of return really isn't much better than what you would expect out of particular investment portfolios. We always want to be higher than the cost of debt. We always want to be higher than the cost of just parking the money in the savings and loan. So 11.4% or 11.8% on an overall portfolio, it's okay, but you can see it's not spectacular. If you could get if you could just invest in the market and get 9 or 10%, maybe that would be worthwhile. Okay, the point of this particular slide is that for some market pricing scenarios, you probably are anticipating a variety of losses, and therefore what you want to do is you want to pick it up on a couple lead products. And of course, where this shows up, and it's very contemporary, the price of pharmaceuticals. Here's some situations where doxycycline, for instance, over a 1-year period has gone up in price 8,241%. And of course, there's a lot of controversy and there's a lot of discussion about increasing in pharmaceutical prices, and many of you would be familiar with EpiPen. I mean, people were outraged at EpiPen. It went from 100 to 600 over a 5-year period, and that is considered significant. But there are many, many other drugs that actually would have a much, much higher percentage increase. And basically what's happening here is that typically what happens is a company will hold a monopoly on a particular technology, and so this albuterol sulfate, again, very common treatment for asthma, has gone up a considerable amount. They probably have a patent, and they probably have a monopoly through that patent on that product in the market, and basically they can charge whatever the market will bear. In this case, it would be whatever the insurance companies are willing to pay. So let's think about the Pro Forma. And in this Pro Forma, this is Bethesda imaging workbook that's available to everybody. What we have to do is, when we put together the sales summary, which is one of the very, very first things we'll do, what we need to do is to not worry so much about the bill of materials or manufacturing costs or anything like that. Think in terms of, in year 1, how many units could we sell 10,000 units in year 1? And what is the unit price? And this unit price is very simply provided as either the reimbursement limit or what the market will bear. So you can see that using this strategy, what you get is a very rapid approach, a very, very quick estimate of what the revenue is from this product in its first year. These manufacturing costs, these are just percentages. You can just assume. And what you end up with is a target margin and a target manufacturing cost and a target profitability. And what this does for you is then sets you up for the challenge of, can I meet those manufacturing costs? Those would be the targets for our designers, and that's how we can frame this from one perspective. Once again, in order to do a pro forma, many people stall or get stuck on the sales and what the sales cost should be. And what this what this spreadsheet can do for you, if you take the market pricing model, not the cost plus model, you simply say, I'm going to estimate comparable prices to comparable products in the market, and so I'm going to predict a certain volume, I'm going to predict a certain unit price, and this is what's going to give me my year 5 revenue. And this, of course, is the start of the pro forma, and it's the very first step you need to do. So, of course, what we want to do is understand that for the pro forma, there's really just about 11 steps in putting together the pro forma. The very first one, of course, is to consider what the product or service sales will look like. It's always important to start with that. And item number 2 is to estimate unit cost and units to approximate sales. And what I'm suggesting to you is that this is not too difficult to do in many cases for a first cut estimate. You can do comparables. Once again, pick the reimbursement value, market, or what the market will bear. And of course, from there on out, you just run through these next 9 steps, and you're just going to look at staffing needed to achieve the sales. Then we look at related production costs, and these might be percentages of, and then ask yourself, how are we going to produce this? And then, of course, with all that in place, you simply then check your basic 4 financial statements, and go through and repeat this for several weeks or even months until you can establish what your 5-year pro forma revenue is, which seems to be the standard when we create business plans. Thank you.